Okay.
Hmm.
Very good. So I'm Walter Barta, and I'm a graduate student in philosophy at Houston Christian University, which is formerly known as Houston Baptist University. Um, and uh, I'm also on a special projects grant as a principal investigator at University of Houston in their digital research commons, which is it's a program for digital humanities topics. So that's something I actually have in common with our previous speaker. Um,
Walter, if I'm sorry to interrupt you a
yeah.
moment, is it possible you could turn on your video for us? That would enhance to be able to see you.
So
Is
I
that
I actually my laptop doesn't have video,
okay?
but I have my phone pointed at me, so that video actually should be visible as
Oh
well.
yes, it is visible. So if you guys scroll on your just on your sort of
Sorry about that.
slideshow of pictures, you'll be able to see.
Yeah, sorry about that. Minor technical difficulty. But Yeah, so I'm going to be presenting on a special topic I'm calling the Tri-Opti Problem for Godlike Superintelligence. And it's a problem that I've been thinking about um, both in my capacity as a philosophy graduate student and in my capacity as a digital researcher. Um, it's interdisciplinary in a way that I'll detail shortly. So the main idea is that there is a an analogous intersection that we can talk about between theology and technology. So um, in my philosophy classes, which at Houston Christian University have some level of significant theological focus, um, one of the tools that we develop is top down conceptual engineering. So, thinking about what kinds of beings are possible, what a godly being might be like, um, and trying to reason through the possibilities conceptually. Um, but then there's a different angle to address, which is the technology question, which we can talk about as a bottom-up computer engineering question. So how does one, starting from first principles of engineering, work your way up towards some kind of a super intelligent being? So interestingly, these two disciplines have sort of a crossover in the sense that theology is working downwards or trying to study super beings from sort of a top down conceptual engineering perspective, and the technology, as some Silicon Valley entrepreneurs will tell you, they're trying to build these super intelligences from the ground up. So that's the interdisciplinary angle that I'm coming from. And specifically, I'm trying to look at what I call the godlike analogy. So if we have a godly being and then we have a godlike being, is there some approximation there? Can we say that the properties of a godly being could be similar to the properties of a godlike being? Specifically, the godlike beings that ostensibly Silicon Valley is trying to create these artificial superintelligences. So, to explore that problem, we can try to think about where would the analogy hold between these beings. Um, so we can think of things by changing godly to godlike, because we're not talking necessarily about gods here, right? We're talking about things that we create, but that have the properties that are approaching something, something super intelligent, something super benevolent, super powerful. We can change its subjecthood to objecthood. So I'm not necessarily saying that these superintelligences have to be subjects. They don't have to have conscious experiences. Maybe they do, but we don't have to. We can sidebar that question because we're just talking about machines at this point. And we can change omni, so the all-powerful being. We can change that instead to optimally, so something that isn't all-powerful, but is getting as close to powerful as a physical being can possibly be. So those are when we're talking about this analogy, those are some distinctions we can start drawing. That's not to say those are exhaustive distinctions, but the just to elaborate a little bit on the kind of comparison we're making. So to talk first about godly beings, there's sort of a classical theological description of a godly being. We have several properties that godly beings are described to have. So we have omnipotence, we have omniscience, we have omnibenevolence, and we have a sense in which that being is not constrained by the physical laws of the universe. They're in some way metaphysically free, such that their omni properties can all coincide in one being. So then with the godlike being, so to draw the parallels, we can talk about the being optimally capable, so as capable as physically possible, optimally intelligent, as intelligent as physically possible, and then optimally aligned, so as benevolent as can be given its technical constraints. And for all of these, we're specifying that this type of being is constrained by physics. So that's the disanalogy between them. But we can also recognize the analogy that if we're trying to talk about these super beings, we want to try to talk about these analogous properties that they might have. So that's the nature of the properties. Now, what could we talk about in the way of problems? So our previous presenters have already talked a little bit about the problem of alignment, which is the idea of aligning a artificial intelligence with human values. But I'm going to talk about two nearby problems. So the first problem is the well-recognized problem of evil in theology. So the worry of the problem of evil is that the tri-omni properties might not necessarily be compatible, because if we see evil in the world, can we really say that the God governing that world has all three properties? That's the traditional statement, so to speak, of the problem of evil, and it relates directly to these tri-omni properties of the godly being. But at least the theological consensus has been that this problem is probably resolvable by recognizing certain metaphysical freedoms. So we can try to conceptually engineer versions of godly beings that can fit all the tri-omni properties, but also do away with the problem of evil and make it all compatible. But analogously, I am proposing something that I'm calling the problem of unalignability, which is meant to be the problem of evil, but for super intelligent godlike systems. So to make the parallel problem, we say the Tri-Opti properties are not necessarily compatible. So basically, the problem of evil, but restated in terms of this physical being. Now, the disanalogy here, though, is that because we're talking about a physical being, a godlike being, not a godly being, it's possibly, not to say it's definitely, but it's possibly unresolvable. And the reason is because that type of being is physically constrained. Its something that we have created with technical principles, right? And it has to abide by those technical principles. So another way of talking about this problem is the idea of an optimization trade-off. So if you're trying to optimize two variables, they can't necessarily always be simultaneously optimized. That's the issue. And there's actually a nice theological parallel to this, which is no one can serve two masters. We can call it the two-master problem. So if you're trying to optimize X and Y at the same time, this is just what engineers try to do, right? But a good engineer knows you can't necessarily do that with two things at the same time. You might have a physical constraint that prevents you. So what would we see in the case of superintelligence? So we could have a case which we can call the trivial case. So the trivial case would be that knowledge and power, as we obtain them, all knowledge and power don't decrease goodness. So we have this graph here, and we can see that as the robot increases in power and knowledge, it always also increases in goodness, right? So the line never decreases. So if that's universally true, then it's not a problem, because we have basically we can always increase both at the same time, and that allows us to have good, powerful artificial intelligences. But we can talk about another case, the non-trivial case. So in this case, we could say that there are some knowledge and some power. When we obtain it, it decreases goodness. So we can't say in this case that all knowledge and power are compatible with goodness. We would have to say, there are certain cases where by increasing knowledge and power, we actually risk bad outcomes. And so you can see here in the graph, we have the robot, but as we increase power and knowledge, we don't necessarily increase goodness all the way. So instead, we have possibly ups and downs, and that's why this is the non-trivial case. You can't necessarily increase both things at the same time in this case. And so the worry would be that if you have an optimal being, so a being that is optimal both in power, knowledge, and goodness, it would exist on this optimality frontier. So this is a principle in engineering, Pareto optimization, the idea that once you get sort of to that highest level, you become constrained at that highest level. So everything becomes a trade-off. At the Pareto optimality frontier, you can try to optimize X and Y of the system, but they're not necessarily both optimal at the same time, unless you have an identical or coincidental case. So here we have the robot, and we can see right now the robot is optimally intelligent, but not optimally powerful or knowledgeable. But then as we increase the power and the knowledge, we're decreasing the goodness of that robot, and we end up getting something that's not good, some kind of devilish creature, right? A monstrous creature. And that's definitely not the outcome we want to see. So that's the worry of this Tri-Opti problem, is that you might not be able to get all the things you want optimized at the same time for these systems. So why should we worry about that? Well, for most engineering problems, a good engineer is going to worry that non-triviality should be the default. And this is logically true because you don't want to assume that nothing bad can happen. It's scientifically true because we observe that there are problems that can arise in science. Just give the example of nuclear bombs, for instance. And practically true, just engineers assume this as a practical matter. So we don't want to assume that these are all default not monsters. We want to be careful and assume they might be monsters. Um, so how might this kind of problem arise? So we can talk about a few different cases here. So we might talk about a case, I call this self-defeating empiricism, where you keep discovering knowledge until at some knowledge level it becomes self-defeating. Um, or you come upon some kind of nihilistic deduction, something where a certain piece of knowledge causes you to a priori uh, redefine goodness. And so, an example of the empiricism case might be that we discover some technology that is destructive to the Earth. The deductive case, the AI could assume some kind of negative outcome, some kind of like amoral outcome. And other cases could be that we have self-defeating affordances, so we gain capabilities that become self-defeating, or we get corrupted by power. These are other options that the AI could encounter. So, what's the sort of takeaway here? So, my goal here was to present this as an interdisciplinary problem. Actually, to say that there is a real way that theological, philosophical reasoning can help, which is to try to actually figure out if the what I'm calling this Tri-Opti problem does obtain for these kinds of beings, and theologians have been thinking about this for thousands of years already. So my thought is that there actually is plenty to work with, talking between the disciplines about this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, speakers.
So, Dr. Lundberg, do you have any initial responses or invitations to others' responses?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Walter, thank you very much for your talk. I have a direct question just for my own understanding, and then some other more derived questions. Could you clarify for me the issue of triviality and non-triviality in your talk?
Yeah. So a trivial case is just a case where you can optimize two things at the same time. And a non-trivial case is one where you can't.
Okay. Yes.
So the question would be which one are we dealing with when we deal with any given AI system?
Okay, good. Thanks. So I was fascinated by your comparisons between a kind of a theological concept or language. Again, I thought of Selma's talk too, just the very way we express that in English certainly influences that way of talking too. So the issue that I wanted to ask about is, what about the time variable? So when we think of nature, we think of society, and sometimes we make changes that are difficult, painful. They may involve sacrifice, but we're looking to the future, and there's some sort of process of change that has to happen before it looks good. Often, I mean, this is in our own life, going on a diet or something, initially very tough. So how would you, or does your concept involve that kind of time adjustment? And I guess in the language of optimization, there's optimal control, where you have a knowledge of the whole process, so you can just design that ahead of time to achieve the optimal end. But there's also the feedback control idea, where you move in what seems to be a good direction, but then you have to replan as you see what happens. So that's kind of my background technically for asking that question.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
good
that's a
question.
good question.
So
So
those are
those are
all
all
elements
elements of
what would have
what
to
would have to
be
be
the
the
solution.
solution.
So
So
I have
I have
simplified it
simplified
for
it
this
for this
presentation,
presentation,
for sure.
for sure.
You could
You could
say
say
that I've
that I've
taken the
taken the
perspective
perspective
of trying to
of trying to
look at
look at
the end
the
game.
end game.
So what is the
what is the
final
final
form,
form,
the most
the most
optimized
optimized
form?
form?
And does
And
that
does that
optimize,
optimize,
does that
does
most
that most
optimized
optimized
form,
form,
is it
is it
possible
possible for it
to
to
be good,
be good,
essentially?
Yeah.
So is the
so
goal
is the
good?
goal good?
That's one
That's
question.
one question.
But then you're bringing
up
the
the
trajectory.
trajectory.
Can we
Can we
get
get there?
even if the
Even
goal
if the
is
goal
good?
is good,
Can we get there without passing through bad
bad
regions?
regions?
And
And
I
I
think
think
you could
you could
ask
ask
this
this
Tri-Opti
Tri-Opti
question
at
at any given
any given
time.
time.
So like
So
we could
like we
ask
could
it
ask
of our
it of our
current
current
time.
time.
And then we could
and then we
ask
could
it
ask it
10 years
10
from
years
now.
from now.
And
And
each different level might have a different frontier where the trade-offs are different. And so is there a navigable route through all those time slices that is best? Is a way of complicating the question.
No, that's a good.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, no,
and the worry is you could get it wrong at different time slices as well as the final end as well.
So omniscience definitely plays in, doesn't it? At some point, if you have opti maximized, but you didn't really know what was going to happen with the whole trajectory, then without omniscience, you wouldn't be able to avoid evil, or worse, so I thought that was a thing to think about. Selma, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on Walter's point about knowledge power, especially in this Tri-Opti problem, and link it to and see how it applies to AI. There is, of course, this theory that greater intelligence can lead to greater stupidity. This is evocative of Immanuel Kant's theory of stupidity of understanding and stupidity of judgment. So stupidity of understanding is easily remedied, because through learning we can remedy stupidity of learning, whereas stupidity of judgment is problematic, and this is where knowledge can be misapplied, knowledge can be abused, etc. And it is in this sense that this can apply to AI. This is, just a reflection. Thank you.
So I would invite other questions. Thank you very much.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
They cannot hear me. You can hear me?
Yes.
I can. Yeah.
Okay. Why is it that I don't get a point of Barto's presentation? It seems to me definitions are maybe helpful in understanding a problem, but what this, I think, framework needs is a practical example for those of us who are not trained in, in a particular aspect of logic, which I think this is basically just a logical exercise. And I don't know how it relates to solving any of the issues that have been brought up thus far by the different papers, namely AI's existential risk to humanity. How do these definitions relate to that? That's our topic. So
Yeah, I don't know if you will consider it practical, but I have an example. It was going to be my next question, if you don't mind, unless someone else has. I would rather have someone else hop in. So I found your talk to be stimulating and to be evocative in various ways, and caused me to think um, philosophically, I guess, is what it, by kind of clarifying what are we assuming about science, our knowledge of nature? Are we assuming omniscience? And where in this process of developing a superintelligence would our lack of omniscience be possibly deadly harmful? So let me just give an example. You talked about being constrained by physics. So my question to you is, what do you mean by physics? And not just to elaborate on that, is physics a changing body of knowledge? Is physics, as you refer to it, complete? Or are you using physics as a synonym for nature itself or being? Those distinctions could be very important, couldn't they, if in the design? So I wonder if there's any response to that.
Yeah, I can try to give some responses.
Yeah, I can try to give some responses.
Yeah.
So in an engineering problem, you can try to make systems that specify certain requirements. So specify a bunch of things that you want, and try to design a system like that. But you're always constrained by what I'm calling physics, what you might call nature or natural law. Those technical constraints that you run into. So because of that, you can't necessarily specify a system to get everything you want. And that's to give an example. So to respond to Dr. Grunwald asking for an example, if in order to get a system to be as good as possible, you actually also have to design it to be so powerful that it can overwhelm the world. Then you are approaching the problem that was described by our previous presenters who worry about these out of control systems. So you might end up creating those super powerful out of control systems in your way to create something good. And that might not be avoidable technically from the technical angle. So that's the worry. I still have the same worry as our previous presenters. I'm just framing it from a different technical angle, I guess you could say. I hope that makes sense.
If I could step in here just for the sake of time, we do need to take a little break, and you could stay in and comment during the break here. Maybe that's the way to do it. But we need to go into a break because in 4 minutes, we're supposed to be back for our plenary presentation. So
So I'll just go ahead and talk into the break if you don't mind.
sure, go ahead.
Yeah, that Walter, that point that David just made, I think it applies to your talk too. I think. I mean, this is what you were doing, right? The metaphors, analogies between the theological statements and descriptions of something, and the technical and world built, finite being. It's a deep problem, isn't it? In philosophy and theology and science. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. McCartney, did you have any thoughts about how, you were clearly, as a literature professor, adept at spotting and analyzing metaphors, but how do you teach that? I mean, how do you learn to do that?
Yeah, I teach them as, maybe I borrow the title of the book, Metaphors We Live By. We live by metaphors. And
like George Lakoff, yes.
Yeah, and I teach pragmatics too. So I teach discourse analysis, pragmatics and literature. So this is a kind of cocktail that makes me live with metaphors every day. Yes. So I use a lot of metaphors in class, and I teach metaphors, especially when I talk about poetry. Poetry is maybe the raison d'être of poetry is metaphor. And when I explain a poem, there is always a metaphor that props, and there is always something that leads us to metaphorical imagery and so on and so forth. So metaphor is omnipresent in all my lectures, whether it be in literature or pragmatics or discourse analysis. I remembered earlier something theological again, when I taught John Milton's On His Blindness, the sonnet, and when he said, and that one talent which is death to hide, lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent to serve there with my Maker and present my true account, lest he returning chide. This is a metaphor that evokes the parable of talents. And the parable of talents itself is maybe something that is a reminder of now today the digital divide. Those who have the talent and those who don't have the talent, those who can serve God and those who can't, and those who serve God right and those who serve God maybe in the wrong way, and perhaps will be cast in darkness forever, as the parable says.
Yes, yeah. Yes, it's wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, there's 1 minute if anybody's got to break away. I'm going to pause for just 1 quick minute.